Welcome to the Chaim Investment Advisors podcast. My name's Chaim Victor Schramm, and I am here with Lillian Karabaic, and today we are going to talk about CalSavers, the new California retirement savings law that affects small businesses, and we will have opinions about that, and we will talk about the basics of how do you do it, how do you comply, and what is CalSavers anyway, as two Oregon people who have uh, extensive personal experience with the Oregon version of this, which is the OG version of this. I believe we were the first. Yeah, we have some opinions, some background, and looking forward to talking about this because we are getting lots of questions this year, very late in the game. Some of the questions,
Yeah.
actually too late for some people. But yeah, so we're going to talk about it because people are still having lots of questions about it. How do you get in line with the plan?
And there's still hope. So, like, the first thing I guess we should say up front is that if you did miss the boat, if you are an Oregon employer with 5 or more employees and you missed the boat for the actual deadline of June 30th, because I know it caught a ton of people off guard if
Yes.
Chaim's email inbox is any indication of this, there is still like a 90-day and even really an 180-day sort of compliance sunset of the real deadline. So don't, if you're watching this, when this originally gets posted on YouTube, you aren't totally screwed yet. So don't be super worried. Like, technically the deadline has passed, but if you're like, oh crap, I do fall into this category, um, you know, get in touch with us and hopefully we can help. Or, if we can't answer your questions, and you want to find a way to be in compliance with us because you don't want to make the state of California your enemy, which is fair, talk to us.
Excellent. So there's probably people who are saying, okay, what even is the rule? How many people do you have to have in your employ to trigger this law? Because, like in Oregon, this came in stages, and some people have already been dealing with it, and it's just arriving in a whole new frontier of employers.
Well, so the very basics of it are, as of June 30th of 2022, if you are an employer in California that has more than 4 or more than 5 employees, then you fall into the category of people that have to 5 or more employees. You are in the category of people that have to either opt into the CalSavers plan, or you need to opt out by saying that you have a different qualified retirement plan that is available to your employees. Um, the thing that is like important to understand here is there was a phase in. They started with this rule in 2020. I don't know if there was anything else going on in September 30th, 2020, where maybe you didn't pay attention. Maybe there was a global pandemic and a pending election. But if you have 100 or more employees, which is the category of people that are probably of employers that are probably least affected by this, because most employers with more than 100 employees, just for tax reasons, are likely to have a qualified employee plan. So they just have to fill in a form and say, hey, we already have something, opt out. Then the next year is when we start to see the category of employers that may or may not have had this opportunity to implement an employer-sponsored retirement plan the next year, which was 50 plus employees. What I think is very interesting about this is that just the next year, they jumped from 50 to 5,
Right.
which is a way, way faster phase in for this.
Yes.
And it really speaks to the way that California, the state of California, goes hard on policies whether or not those policies have been proven to be effective at their goals, California's like, we are a laboratory for democracy. We will give it a shot. And they will do it fast and they will do it hard. And then they will charge you fines if you do not comply.
Indeed. And you got to let them know it's not enough. And I think this is one of the things that I've encountered the most. One of the questions that I get the most is, okay, so, but I already like have a plan. I don't really need to do anything, right? I already have a 401k. I have my simple IRA. I've had it forever. They realize that, right? And the answer is no. You do actually have to go on CalSavers and let them know through the website, which luckily they make prominent. It's, I believe, one of the first things that you see when you go to the website is let CalSavers know that you have a compliant plan already. And it's not terribly difficult. You just document in a brief workflow exactly what your plan is, where it is, and it is pretty simple. But you do have to do that, or they are going to probably check in on you.
Well, and if we know anything about California, it's that they're like the last enemy. I mean, I would rather be on the bad list for the IRS than I would be on the California Department of Revenue's bad list, because they will find you. They will turn over a rock and find you and fine you money. So
Yes.
I know I said don't be scared, but I will also say do it. It is an extremely frustrating part about being a small business owner is that things can just be implemented and then it almost feels like no one was busy telling you about this until already the deadline was passed.
Right.
But luckily, the opt-out form is relatively simple. What we don't have clarity on is if you are going to be required to do this again. Because if you do enroll in CalSavers, if you decide to enroll in CalSavers, there are a bunch of like ongoing tasks that you have to do. So it doesn't actually cost you as the employer any direct money. It's essentially a administrative burden for you going forward. Which is, it's what you do as part of payroll, which is, I know, everybody's favorite thing to do as a small business owner. But like a lot of the things that I think are important to understand is that it involves a lot of the administration and headache of having a qualified employer plan like a 401k or a SEP or a simple with annual employee census to track eligibility of employees, having enrollment packets to new employees within a certain amount of hire, like tracking opt-ins and outs, setting up payroll deductions. Like it has a bunch of that administrative headache while not actually really providing you feasibly any benefits from a tax perspective. So there are a lot of reasons why you might very well want to, if you are in the category of someone that doesn't have an employee retirement plan as a small business owner, and you were like, maybe I should just do CalSavers because it's right there. And if I don't, then I'm going to get in trouble. It's very likely that setting up a qualified retirement plan, even if you like hire someone to do it for you, even if you go for a very simple kind of plan that's administered through like your payroll provider, for example, a lot of them have kind of like opt-ins, you are likely to get better benefits from a tax perspective, from an accounting perspective, than you are for all this unpaid paperwork you have to do to comply with CalSavers. So that's my pitch for do the research. Don't just opt into it, because like, Chaim, do you want to explain exactly what CalSavers essentially is from the perspective of the type of account it is?
Yeah, it's an IRA. It is essentially just an IRA that for some reason is at work for people. And that's always been curious to me about these programs, as much as like I very much understand why they are policy wise needed in some format, some kind of solution. Yes, I understand why these exist people who've listened to the podcast probably already know about my opinions about that. But it's just an IRA, and unfortunately, it does not have better contribution limits than a regular IRA that people could just set up and deal with themselves. That is unfortunate. And a lot of times, in my experience with having done Oregon Saves uh, with businesses, basically we'll go through the whole uh, decision making tree of, okay, here's the administrative burden that it adds, here's all of the headache that it adds, here's the benefits that it adds, and I go, you could just have a simple IRA. You don't need a 401k necessarily. You don't need to do that, but at least the simple IRA has a much higher contribution limit. It is more than twice as high, which obviously is a greater benefit to the employees. Also, there is match in a simple IRA, and it's a very easy to implement and not particularly more difficult than just running the plan itself. It's very simple to do relative to either of these CalSavers, Oregon Saves. It's never really made sense to me why you then wouldn't at least do that. 401ks obviously give you a higher contribution still, but they are higher cost, so I understand why some people don't want to make that leap. But at least the simple IRAs also have the opportunity to have more expansive investment options, and that's one of the complaints that I'm sure we probably both have the same complaint.
So I want to talk a little bit more about the administrative headache before we dive too deep into the investment options, because I think they're really important, because the investment options are what actually affects your employees and why this entire policy in both California and Oregon exists, which is that we have a retirement saving crisis. And so this is an attempt by the states to try to make it easier, make it simpler. They're trying to use a lot of this behavioral economics nudges to just get employees auto-enrolled in a plan. But the administrative headaches, I've been on the administrator side of doing this at a small nonprofit, from Oregon, which is 100% what California is modeled out after. It's it's the same custodian now. So that means the people that are in charge of holding on to the money. That's what custodian means. It has the exact same investment options. It has a very similar structure as far as who is required to enroll, opt-out time, how the payroll deduction is. So I would be pleasantly surprised if the website is any better than the website that I had to use. But what I will say is the website was confusing for employees. It was challenging to deal with. I had a lot of problems with the ACH hookup on ours. It created even more accounting frustration nightmares because essentially I would have to hand do the calculations for our employees who all got paid variable amounts. So it wouldn't just be a set amount out of their salary each month, because they were paid mostly hourly, as is going to be true for a lot of small businesses that might opt into this. So I was sitting there having to do calculations for all of our employees based on their percentages. And then it would get pulled out as one big ACH batch, which out of our separate from payroll, because it's not integrated with our payroll provider, which meant that when it came to doing double entry bookkeeping from accounting, I was left with having to break out in QuickBooks every single one of those transactions on both sides and categorizing it appropriately. And that part is, but there's no different or additional benefits on the tax side, because that it's the same as paying the money. It's coming out of their paycheck. It's all just their money. So there is an administrative headache about it. And then the other problem that I had was that one of the big responsibilities as the sponsor of a employee retirement plan is that you have fiduciary status. You can essentially kind of take that fiduciary status and kind of hand it over to someone else, which is what a lot of people do. But you still have to work in the best interest of participants. You still have to have a certain amount of plan options available for them. And you need to provide them with some kind of education. Like they're, often that education comes in the form of like a pamphlet, which is, I think, woefully under what I think you should be required to do. But the thing that you need to understand is that you're taking on a lot of the burdens of those things without having the training or really the help from who you would normally have a relationship with, because the relationship with the custodian is with the state of California.
Right.
It's not with you as an individual employer, the same way that it would be if you set up an employee-sponsored retirement plan. And so I was constantly left with the situation where I was lucky I was able to answer these questions, but I would have employees approaching me that would have situations where they didn't realize this was an IRA because it doesn't make it entirely clear. And they wouldn't realize they already have an IRA, and actually they were going to over contribute between the two. And like, I shouldn't be in the position of giving my employees tax advice or making sure they don't do something that is going to make them run afoul. One of the things is that there isn't a clear way to make sure that the employee doesn't make too much in household income to qualify for an IRA, which is exactly what they would be doing if they had set up an IRA on their own. There are a number of ways, because every single employee that we had at that job, everybody was part-time, so everyone had a different source of income. They all had other jobs because it was a nonprofit. Nobody made great money there. And because of that, I was left in this situation of you're expecting me to know an awful lot about my employees that isn't, frankly, my business. And I'm not getting any of the support necessary to give that kind of fiduciary training, to hold on to that fiduciary responsibility or give any kind of financial or investment training to employees. And frankly, most people are not, the average small business owner of 5 employees, and even maybe their part-time bookkeeper that helps them out, is not the person that should be doing that. That is not what is supposed to happen. And so that was the problem that we were running into. The other thing too is that amongst these, this is a big burden for employers. And all of the early data, especially on the Oregon Saves plan, the ANIC data I have from CalSavers, is that most employees are still choosing to opt out. They could be choosing to opt out because they already have an IRA, which was the case for me as someone who was subject to this and also had to administer it. But they could be opting out because they just don't feel like they have the ability to have an automatic 5% payroll deduction going into an IRA. There is a cost of living crisis. There's huge inflation. And a lot of the employees that are going to qualify for this because they are median income, because Roth IRA, upper household income limits are not that high, especially in California. Right? Because these are federal limits. And if you're living in Southern California and you're making below the Roth limit, you might not have very much discretionary income to be saving for retirement, which is a problem in and of itself. But it isn't that a lot of people are choosing to opt out because they don't feel like they have that ability to do it right now. A 5% essentially take home pay deduction. It's a little less than that. Well, no, it's 5% because it's not even tax deferred. It's all Roth IRA. It's not traditional. So it's a straight 5% less that you're taking home when groceries have gone up 18%. Not for a lot of people, it's just not going to be practical. So I said I was going to have spicy feelings on this, but what I'm going to say is there's a lot of ongoing administrative tasks and responsibilities. And I think for a lot of small employers that do want to do what's best for their employees, especially if you're in California, where you may have now been required to switch a lot of people that were previously contractors to W-2. Therefore, they fall under the purview of this plan because of other policy choices that California has made. Yes. Yeah, you might very well be in the situation where, as a business owner or as the person in charge of HR at a small business, you may discover there's just a lot of better options for you that can have financial benefits for you as an owner, like, for example, something like a SEP, or that are just going to be easier to administer, like a simple IRA. One of the big benefits of some of the other options, other than just directly enrolling in CalSavers, is that a lot of small business owners really like is the option to do profit sharing, because profit sharing is a great
Right.
incentive for small business employees, right? Because if business is good, you can share that wealth, you can help them prepare for retirement, you can do it in a tax advantaged way for everyone. And like, if times are tough, you don't have to do that extra contribution. And so that's one of the big advantages of the other investment vehicles. In this case, let's talk about the retirement options, because the fund options within the CalSavers and also the Oregon Saves program, I'm not impressed. How do you feel?
I mean, they're both State Street. So State Street Global Advisors runs the program, and the problem with providers like State Street kind of stepping in and creating the entire uh, investment option platform is that, well, they are going to use mostly target date funds, which is both Oregon and CalSavers have done this. And, a lot of the problem with a company like State Street doing that tends to be that State Street, when they make a target date retirement fund, is State Street going to make a fund that has the truly best in class investments from every asset class that you would want in a retirement account? No, they will put State Street's options, whatever those happen to be, and whatever they think that should be. And they don't necessarily pick the best ones. They pick the ones that they're most interested in having in a target date retirement fund where people won't be moving their money around quite a bit. And that is my number one complaint about the investment options with these is, target date retirement funds have a lot of problems when they are created by a fund family. And State Street in particular has one fund that they are very famous for and has tons of assets, and that's great. And that's their S&P 500 index fund, and that's fantastic. That's a great cornerstone to have of retirement portfolios, especially for younger people. Great, include that. But then they have a bunch of other State Street products in there, and only State Street products, and that is the beginning of my complaint is that people don't tend to actually even look at them. My experience usually is if somebody comes to me over the years and they say, I've had this target date retirement fund through work that was just the default for years. And now it's time for me to start really thinking about how I am investing. Most of the time, I used to be like, okay, well, what do you think about the fund that you're in? And I say, I have never looked at it ever. Usually it's the main answer. It's the default.
Yep.
I've never looked at it. I do not know how much risk I've taken. I don't really know how much it goes up. Uh, Sometimes at all, because mostly I just know the number that I put in and what it is now. Uh, and so that is most people's experience of target date funds. Uh, Nobody tends to pick a target date fund if they know what they're doing. Uh, Pretty much nobody goes, oh, let me pick the target date fund. They will tend to gravitate to other options. And one of the strange things about both of these plans is one of the few non target date options that you have is a money market fund, which having a money market fund in a retirement account like that is fairly odd. in terms of if we're trying to solve a retirement crisis, interesting option. I'm not sure how many. I don't know any of the statistics on what percent of people actually use that, but it is interesting because to me, um, having that be like the only real alternative to a State Street target date retirement fund is not optimal, and performance of these funds has not been thrilling.
And I will also say, from even outside just like the fund performance and the way that they're constructed, I think it's important to understand that because these are IRAs and something that is relatively simple for employees to set up on their own, the funds available from it carry a pretty high expense ratio relative to what is available to people setting up a IRA for themselves.
Yes.
So, they vary their percentage of assets under management, and they're 0.825 to 0.95%. I will also say they were saying they were targeting much lower for Oregon Saves, but they've actually been running higher than 1% expense ratios in Oregon. And that is a great example of, especially at the lower, assets that people are going to be investing, there are a lot of no expense ratio funds available.
Right.
There are a lot of no load funds that are available, especially for the particular case that of what this is doing, which is essentially dollar cost averaging. Like, this is a perfect example of regular investment on a monthly basis, like being invested, and you are buying the same probably dollar amount each month of something. It is a perfect example of something where you would gain a lot of benefit from investing in as an employee in something that has a lower expense ratio, right? And so it's important to consider that this is hitting exactly the kind of employees that would not expect to see those kind of expense ratios, because they're not usually going to be pursuing the kind of investments that come with those.
Right, and that's what's always been kind of bizarre to me about it. Okay, so State Street running things. Well, State Street, the flagship in most of these funds or the portfolios, if you look at them by what are the funds invested in, is a index of the S&P 500, which should be no more than 0.1 at the absolute most in expense ratio. That should be about what that costs at the most, and really some providers manage to come in at 0.03 or 0.04 or even zero for such a product at this point. So that's what is so strange about these products is, and that's to my point about not going out and picking the best low cost options from every provider in these options. They just pick whatever State Street wants more assets in, and that happens to not always be the cheapest option. And usually,
I mean,
cheapest is best, or almost
this is a great
always.
This is a great win for State Street, right? Because they've got a state in the union that has only recently started to require like tons of people to qualify as W-2 employees. It's the richest state in the country. It's the state that, if it was its own country, would be the economy, the seventh largest economy in the world. Like, if California was its own freaking country and had none of the rest of the United States, it was still the seventh largest economy in the world. All of this to say, they now have, without a vote of the people, implemented this program and given this contract to State Street to essentially like probably dump like large portions of people's payroll like into whatever funds State Street kind of decided to bundle in here. So and that isn't, I'm not even assuming malice necessarily from State Street. Like, this was a
Yeah,
good
need to.
business win. It's like they have some, as you said, they have some pretty decent funds, but they also have some funds that maybe are not so great, because that's like a common thing you have when you have one of these custodians. And so it's um it's frustrating to be put in this position as an employer. So I guess, we've done our rants. If an employer has not complied with this yet, or is in the situation where maybe they did just decide to kind of opt into it, but they're already having feelings of like, maybe I don't want to do this.
Right.
What alternatives do they have, and kind of what are the deadlines they should keep in mind?
Well, basically, you want to be taking action as soon as possible, right? Because ultimately, if you want to uh, fall into the good books of California, what they want to know is that as soon as you were aware that you needed to comply, that you started doing something about it. So yeah, taking action, starting the process. Uh, as soon as possible is usually best. Sometimes it takes a while to get alternatives set up, and they are aware of that. Simple IRAs, there's a turnover of a couple weeks from faxing the custodian the paperwork and everything involved with that. They're aware of that. That is yeah, being in process though of doing it as soon as possible is best, because they do take some time. And yeah, just because the paperwork sometimes can really drag on, I would do that sooner than later. Um, yeah, but options include, of course, 401ks. Obviously, 401ks are um, not necessarily the only option, but I know it is one that people immediately gravitate towards, because
Mhm.
people in our world go out and sell 401ks. They get more to do that.
Yeah.
So, of course, they do a lot of that. One of my, the things that I don't love about these laws, and having seen what it looked like in Oregon, something that I think about a lot there is that some of the plans for the 401k plans for smaller providers, for smaller companies, are not the best ones. Some of them, the very large providers who are, the kind of gold standard of providers for 401ks, usually kind of want to see you have a lot of money
Yeah.
to effectively work with them. And so there's always been this huge slice of the market of very small companies that are not well served, because there isn't tons of money to be made in it, right? And so 401ks, not the only choice, and not always the best choice as a result of that. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. A lot of that has to do with talking to your employees about what would you really save. How much access to saving do you want? If people say we want as much as possible, we're going to save huge amounts of our paycheck, uh, or at least $20,000 every single year. Okay, yeah, maybe 401ks are good. And also, if you as the employer would like to avail yourself of that, higher contribution limits, that's a consideration. But simple IRAs, honestly, to me, if you're already like, okay, let me just get in compliance and make it happen, and I'm going to give them the IRAs through CalSavers and what have you, definitely explore simple IRAs. Definitely explore it, because simple IRAs have a higher contribution limit. They do have much better, in my opinion, tax benefits for yourself, for the company, and for your employees in many cases. And so, simple IRAs, that does comply with the law. People, a lot of times, have never even heard of them. Unlike 401ks, almost everybody knows 401ks, but simple IRA is well worth your time investigating. And if you're in the process of getting it set up, you get it set up as soon as possible, and you let California know that you're doing that. You are probably going to be in good shape.
Yeah, I agreed. And the like things, I mean, it's worth talking to someone to help you wade through the different
Yes.
like the different options for you because they're really confusing. And if you're not someone who is if you're busy working in your business and not on your business, you don't want to have to research all the different types, but it's good to have someone to like walk you through the different questions that you need to ask. Like the in addition to like how much do your employees want to save, it's also good to understand like what your requirements would be for some of these different ones because for some people you're going to find out, oh, we have to do what's called non-discrimination testing, which sounds it's very different than what it sounds like. It actually just has to do with if you have employees that are highly compensated employees or are officers, how much they are saving in the plan versus other employees that are not making as much money. That's roughly what it accounts to. But there's ways to essentially avoid having to do that kind of testing. But it's important to understand what your responsibilities would be for each one of these plans. And one reason a lot of times small businesses end up picking like a simple IRA is because it is a lot easier to administer. It's got a lot more it's got a lot more options to not overburden yourself with administrative responsibility. I worked at an organization that had a 401k and, wasn't doing a match and had about 30 employees. And out of the 30 employees, I was the only one using the 401k, which is actually how I got into finance in the first place, because I desperately said, please don't get rid of it. Please let me give it a workshop to my coworkers about why they should save for retirement. But it was, with the average employee compensated at like $30,000 a year, most of them, a 401k with no match didn't even make that much sense for them, right? And so the question was, why are we spending this money on administering a plan when we've got one employee using it over here? And it had a lot of regulatory burden. And once you've kind of got a 401k in place, it can be a lot harder to undo that. Right. So it's important to understand what your responsibilities are, but also what the benefits of each one are, because like having an employee retirement plan, especially when you've got the state of California or Oregon breathing down your neck saying you have to, there are a lot of benefits to them. And, like our tax code is structured in such a way where, especially as a small business owner or a closely held corporation, you've got a lot of opportunities to do some cool things for your own financial planning through your business that a lot of like small business owners just don't think about. Like they're too busy focusing on like making the widgets that they make or whatever they're doing, being a graphic designer, making scented candles, whatever, pottery, whatever your job is in your business, to walk back and go like, okay, well, if I'm not going to be making ceramic pots until I die, how do I find a way to, while times are good, make sure that I'm utilizing and not paying tons of taxes on money that I could use later? So there's a lot of ways in which you can do some cool things. And I think profit sharing is like, I've mentioned it like 3 times now, but I think a lot of employers don't realize that there are opportunities for them to do that within the confines of a retirement plan and have even better benefits for both them and their employees. Because I think a lot of small business owners are motivated to do that. You want your employees to be bought into the success of your business. And a lot of people do it by doing commission chunks or bonuses. And they don't realize like all of the opportunities to do that within the confines of a retirement plan. And there are so many cool and unique ways to do that in different plans like simple IRAs and SEPs that people just don't realize. So
yes, and so I think my takeaway, having worked with these in the past, seeing this happen in California and how it's people are approaching it there, is basically, if you're going to spend the time complying with and implementing the CalSavers or Oregon Saves, it's really well worth your time to recognize that it's not actually easier to do those in the long run. It's about the same uh, as having a simple IRA, or actually maybe more difficult even than some 401ks, which are sometimes easier to operate. It's well worth your time investigating those, because those other options, simply because it's about the same time. It's not actually easier. They just, it sounds like it's going to be until
No.
you start
They love
doing
they
it.
they have on their front page of their website, they're like, employers have limited responsibilities. There are no employer fees. Their registration is quick and easy. They're really trying to convince you that it's quick and easy. But then when you actually dig into what the annual compliance, what the requirements are around hiring and letting go new employees, especially if you're in the case of having employees that are W-2 compensated but are seasonal. Like if you hire a bunch of people every summer to work at your farm stand when you're a farmer, you may discover that you've got a bunch of responsibilities as far as delivering paperwork to
Yes.
people that you only ever hire to like work at the farmers market on Saturdays during the summer. So like there's a ton of ways in which you may not realize that your responsibilities don't just end with clicking the button on the CalSavers website. And you might as well investigate. Maybe it is the best option for you, but you might as well put in the legwork to see whether there's likely another better option for you.
Right. Also, another thing that I always forget to mention, because these are all laws that are all kind of happening at the same time, is the Secure Act, which a lot of people, even accountants that I know, did not know that this provision existed. Let's say that you say, man, CalSavers isn't actually easier than having a safe harbor 401k for my company. It's probably more difficult, and I see less benefit out of it. Um, but maybe it's going to like have a startup cost or an upfront cost to implement a 401k that CalSavers wouldn't. Well, there is actually a tax benefit, a credit that you get through the Secure Act. Well worth being aware of that as well, for startup costs related to starting a new retirement plan for your company. And um, coincidentally, the credit tends to be similar to what the actual cost is. And so, for a lot of people, they imagine it will be much more expensive, and they're not aware there is actually a credit to offset the cost of getting one up and running. But there is, that is the good news. And that also is well worth investigating. If that's the main impediment, it is very handy to have the Secure Act have come into being just a couple of years ago.
That's also worth knowing. I mean, it's worth knowing in any state because it is pretty cool. But it's worth knowing that, like, in Oregon, one of the, I think, massive oversights of the Oregon Saves program was that they actually made this go all the way down to one employee. So if you're one of the many, many people who became self-employed during the pandemic, because we've seen huge upticks in the amount of people who became self-employed, you may have registered your business with the state of Oregon as like a single member LLC, and then suddenly got this letter being like, you have to have an employee retirement plan, blah, 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 blah. A lot of people didn't realize that if they just have an IRA for themselves, they're fine, and they could have just checked the box. And some people enrolled in Oregon Saves thinking that it was like going to be this great benefit to them, not realizing that it's a Roth IRA. But it's important to understand that if you are a business, you would be able to utilize, even if you are a sole proprietor, there are ways in which you can utilize kind of some of those provisions in order to help you set up a retirement plan that would have a lot more benefits for you. Like if you're a sole proprietor, there are so many darn ways to like save money for retirement, or even if like you can do some tricky things to get to it before retirement age, like there's ladders, there's ways to take stuff out of there. And one of your biggest expenses as a sole proprietor is taxes. And you can avoid a lot of those taxes by access to the large amounts of your of your income you can save in tax sheltered places as a sole proprietor. So it's worth
Right.
understanding that.
Yeah, that is
So you might
underappreciated.
be falling under new compliance to this plan and not even realize it, because it goes all the way down to a single employee in the state of Oregon, which is bananas. So
Yes. Yeah, we have seen some interesting implementation of our rule in regards to that. But yeah, and that's the funny thing about it applying to one person is, of course, there are tremendously better options. If it's a SEP IRA, the solo 401k, you name it, they are much more intriguing and not expensive. And you only have to do it once a year, right? That's the nice thing about a lot of the plans that exist for solo practitioners or very small businesses. So maybe just yourself is many of them are lump sum contribution, not an ongoing administrative activity such as using the CalSavers or Oregon Saves.
yeah. Well, any parting thought? I mean, I feel like we've been very spicy with our takes on this. I my parting thought for you is that if you found this because you were searching, being like, crap, what is this thing I just heard I need to comply with, and for CalSavers, one, take action as soon as possible, just because the fines actually do add up quite a lot. It can be up to $750 a year per employee that you pay in fees for not complying. So do it as quickly as possible, but don't panic too much. They understand that these things do take some time, so just start to work towards it. And I would utilize this opportunity to investigate the best option for you, not just the default option to make this problem go away.
Yes. Yeah, that's always how I feel about those two. Is like it's worth the time because it is, like you said earlier, difficult to undo some of the times, and it becomes a whole thing. And especially the more people it applies to, the bigger thing it becomes. And so, choosing the best option the first time, since it really is going to take about the same amount of work to do any of these options in the long run. It's worth it.
Get back to like doing your business and
Right.
like actually running your business, and not just, complying with whatever the state of California has decided you need to comply with, or the state of Oregon. So yeah. Any parting thoughts that you have, Chaim, or advice you have for people that might have found this podcast not because they love listening to our podcast, but because they're panicking?
Right. Don't panic. Get in touch with a fiduciary who, like ourselves, or any number of CSPs or fiduciary advisors, though, are the people to talk to. Accountants can also be great people to talk to. A lot of times they will just send you to something like us anyway. But I would, yeah, definitely get in touch with the financial person in your life. And if you don't have one of those, yeah, this is actually a good moment to do that because
Yeah.
this is a fairly long running decision. Retirement plans. Usually, once you set them up, they are there for the rest of the time that you're working. Yeah.
And they're also complicated, so it's worth having an expert. And this isn't just a pitch because we're in the industry and we're trying to say like you should hire an expert. If I felt like this is easy to DIY, I would tell you to DIY it.
Yes.
I genuinely feel like, as someone who was in the position of having to administer these and had the book learning, I was still like, man, I really would like to talk to someone else that looks at this all the time. So talk to someone who thinks about this stuff all the time so that you don't have to worry about it. So
It's good advice. Well, yeah, that is. I think we covered that topic pretty well. And yeah, if this is the first time you've listened to the Chaim Investment Advisors, we mostly talk about completely different stuff other than complying with laws. This is not something we do all of the time. I think mostly we talk about macroeconomics and some fun stuff some of the time, a lot of user generated, hey, talk about this on the podcast, and subscribe for more of that because we make these as often as we can, somewhere between 1 and 2 weeks, given we are a relatively busy financial planning firm. Uh, but we also like to make content for YouTube occasionally. So, yeah, this has been the Chaim Investment Advisors podcast. I'm Chaim, and this is
I'm
Lillian.
Lillian.
And we will see you next time.
Bye.